My name is Mark, I'm 32, and my wife Louise is 35. We've been together for almost 6 years now, and honestly, I thought I knew her. Louise had been in the restaurant business for a long time before I met her, and she had several successful establishments in our city and the one next door. She's always had an entrepreneurial spirit, and when we moved in together, she offered me the general manager position at her restaurants in town. I had a stable job, but it seemed like a natural transition to working with her on something she was passionate about. Plus, who wouldn't want to work with their spouse to create something big, right? Things were going great for a few years. We had our ups and downs, but we felt like a team. At least, that was until I introduced her to my friend Liam at a work party. Liam and I have known each other for a long time, and I trust the guy, or did. He's married, and his daughter Emma, who's 18, came with him to the party. I knew Emma was into astronomy, a bit of a passion I've had since I was a kid, so for her birthday I got her a fancy skywatcher telescope. We bonded over stargazing and the whole mystical side of the universe, which honestly brought light to dark days I didn't even know were hanging over me. Looking back, that office party at one of our restaurants was the moment when everything started to change. I invited Liam, Emma, and a few other friends to join us for the celebration. My wife seemed very keen to make everyone feel welcome, especially Liam. She went out of her way to make sure he had a good time. I shrugged it off as her being a great hostess, but after that night, everything seemed different. At first, I thought maybe I was just overthinking it, but soon I started to notice small changes. I noticed that my workload had increased significantly. Meetings, staffing issues, and even supplier issues started to fall on me, while Louise seemed to have all the time in the world. She was handling everything remotely, and suddenly I found her going on unexpected trips or having meetings that seemed to pop up out of nowhere. Whenever I asked, she would laugh it off, saying that they were business matters that I didn't need to worry about. One day, I was in one of our restaurants during a slow shift when Emma walked in. She mentioned that her father had been coming in a lot more lately, meeting Louise at random times. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I kept it casual, asking Emma about her father's business. She said she thought he was just helping Louise with some project, but didn't know the details. But her words stuck in my head. Why was Liam, my best friend, so involved in my wife's work behind my back? As the days went by, I couldn't shake that nagging feeling. I started checking my phone more, going over old messages from her. There was a pattern I hadn't noticed before. Louise often had these last-minute plans that always seemed to happen when Liam was conveniently free. I still didn't have anything concrete, and I didn't want to accuse her of something based on nothing more than a hunch. Fast forward to last weekend. I was exhausted from managing restaurants, so I decided to head home early after an all-day meeting. When I got to our house, I noticed Liam's car parked a block away. Maybe it was paranoia, maybe it was intuition, but something in me told me to wait. I drove around and parked at a few houses to watch. A little while later, I saw Liam come out of my house, straightening his shirt and smoothing his hair. Louise came out with him, laughing about something, and then gave him a long, languid hug before he finally left. I felt sick. My wife, the person I trusted most, was standing there watching my best friend leave, like they were sharing some private moment meant for just the two of them. But I didn't confront her then. I couldn't. I just left and spent the night in a cheap hotel because I couldn't stand her being around, even though that was just the beginning. When I got home the next day, she was acting completely normal, like nothing had happened. She even asked how my meeting went, smiling the same smile I had seen on Liam's face. I'm not one to snoop, but I checked her phone one day when she'd left it on the counter while taking a shower. Most of their messages had been deleted, and the few that remained seemed mundane, but one in particular stuck out to me. Liam had sent her a photo of a bottle of wine from the restaurant with the caption, "Brings back memories, doesn't it?" And her response? "The best nights, indeed." That's when I realized I wasn't crazy. They were hiding something from me, something big. And to make matters worse, my own wife was dumping her responsibilities on me, leaving me to run the entire business while she, played house with my best friend? That night, I couldn't hold back any longer. I asked her point blank if something was going on with Liam. She laughed, calling me paranoid and saying I was probably working too much. She brushed it off so easily that for a moment I almost believed her. But later that evening I heard her on the phone. I couldn't make out the words, but her tone was soft, gentle even. I hadn't heard her speak to me like that in months. I decided I needed to finally let go of the tension and distance my friend from my wife. So last weekend Liam, his daughter Emma, and I went on a stargazing trip Emma had been planning for weeks. She was so excited she could barely sit still on the way, and it was actually nice to have some of that energy around. I needed a distraction. I kept telling myself it was just a fun outing with friends, and that I would focus on Emma's passion for the stars. But when we got to the remote clearing she'd found for us, the only thing I could see was Liam, and it felt like he knew something I didn't. While we were getting ready, Emma was buzzing with enthusiasm, setting up the telescope and chatting about everything she knew. But once night fell and she was gone with her camera, it was just Liam and me. That's when he hit me. "How's Louise doing? Are you okay?" I nearly choked. Was he just asking out of concern? Or did he know something he wasn't saying? I tried to brush it off, muttering something about us both being busy. But he kept looking at me like he wanted me to say more. For a second, I felt like asking him what the hell was going on. But before I could, Emma was back, practically dragging us off to look at some new constellation she'd found. I was grateful, really, anything to avoid that conversation. The rest of the night was peaceful enough. We all laughed, joked, pointed out shooting stars. Emma was beaming the entire time, oblivious to the strange tension that had settled between Liam and me. But when it was time to get ready, I caught his eye again, making me feel like I was missing something. I kept thinking about his question the whole way back. I kept wondering if maybe I was reading too much into it, or if he really knew something about my life that I didn't. By the time we got home, I was exhausted. Louise was waiting for me, pretending to miss me, asking how the trip had been. I told her it had been fun, that Emma was on cloud nine, and tried to let it go. But then she started asking about Liam. Did he seem happy? How was he doing? That felt wrong. Why was she so interested in him? She wasn't even pretending to ask casually. She was pressing. And all the while, she kept looking at me, like she was searching for something in my answers. I tried to shake it off and went to bed, but I barely slept. The next day, things started to come together. Louise was on her phone more than usual, but whenever I passed, she'd quickly lock the screen. And then there were the late-night texts. One night, her phone vibrated just as I walked into the room, and she jumped as if she'd been caught off guard. She told me it was just a friend from work, but there was something in her tone, that casual nonchalance, that sent shivers down my spine. Emma dropped by again a few days later. She'd been hanging out more than usual, as if she was trying to keep me company. At one point, she looked at me with a worried expression and asked, "Are you and Louise okay?" I didn't know what to say, so I mumbled something about stress at work. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her face. But she just nodded, patted me gently on the shoulder, and told me that if I ever needed to talk, she'd be there. Emma's only 18, but there's a wisdom in her eyes I'd never seen before, a kind of empathy that somehow got through to me. That night, I began pacing the house, searching for answers I didn't have. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the light on Louise's phone felt like some unspoken accusation. I even started looking through old photos, trying to spot something I'd missed. But everything seemed perfect. That was what made it worse. It was like I was stuck in this twisted game where nothing made sense, and yet somehow everything made sense. When Louise came home late one night, I asked if she was okay, trying to sound casual. She smiled tiredly and said she'd had a hard day. She was full of excuses, saying she'd been at the restaurant dealing with some personnel issue. But she wouldn't meet my eyes while she spoke. She kept glancing down, nervously twisting the ring on her finger. Then, over the weekend, I decided to take Emma out again, hoping for some clarity. I thought maybe talking to her would help me see things more clearly. We went hiking, and at one point while we were resting, she turned to me and asked, "Do you think people can really change?" The question caught me off guard, and I didn't know how to respond. Maybe I wasn't even the right person to ask, but I found myself telling her that we can change, though sometimes not in the ways we expect. She looked thoughtful, as if weighing my words, and for a moment I felt like we were two lost souls trying to make sense of a world that kept changing beneath us. After those words, she pulled out her phone. She didn't say anything at first. She just scrolled through a few things, seemingly distracted. I assumed she was checking social media or texting someone. But then she stopped and handed me the phone. "You need to see this," she said quietly. I glanced at the screen and felt my stomach churn. It was a video I recognized immediately. My wife. My friend Liam. I blinked, trying to process what I was watching. It wasn't just one video. There were several. Scenes of them making love like it was their last time. I couldn't believe it. Emma told me she'd found it a week ago, that it was on her dad's computer. He'd come home drunk one night and in his state, he'd forgotten to log out. Emma, trying to be responsible, had gone to write an essay when she noticed a folder called Ecstasy. At first, she didn't know what to do, but when she opened it, she couldn't deny what she saw. My wife and Liam. In every compromising position imaginable. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the screen, not really seeing anything. Emma was trying to process it too. I could tell she was torn. She wanted to help, to comfort me, but it wasn't enough. I wasn't sure what I needed at that moment, but I knew one thing. I needed to act. I didn't tell anyone what I knew. Not Liam. Not my wife. I kept it all to myself, but I knew what I had to do. So I did what I do best. I started digging a hole. I went back to work at the restaurant, but this time I did it with a purpose. I started making stupid decisions, doing things that I knew would ruin the place, but I didn't care. You see, the restaurant business had always been Louise's, and I didn't have the heart to keep pretending that everything was fine. It wasn't. So I started delaying payments, deliberate delays that caused staff to quit, quality to decline, and customers to notice. When Louise got her monthly report, it hit her like a freight train. She couldn't understand why the place was on the verge of bankruptcy. The numbers didn't lie. Things were getting worse and worse, fast. She asked me what had happened, why things had changed so much. I just shrugged, like I didn't care. "Maybe it's time to rethink some things," I said, a smile appearing on my face. I couldn't stop it, even though I knew it would hurt her. She deserved it. When she found out I'd done it on purpose, I don't think she knew whether to yell at me or cry. She just stared at me, stunned. We both knew it was over, but the realization hit her like a brick. We broke up that night, but it was necessary. I could feel the damage we had done to each other. I thought it was over, but I still had Liam to deal with, and I didn't think it would happen like this. Shortly after that, Emma called me. She needed me to pick her up from college. Her dad was away again, presumably with Louise, and she didn't want to be left alone in an empty house. I was hesitant, but I agreed. It was a quiet drive. We said nothing to each other. Emma seemed lost in her thoughts, and I was still processing the mess I'd made. When we got to her house, Emma invited me in for tea. I could tell she wasn't really asking, but rather needing someone. So I went in. It was a strange feeling, being in her house, knowing what I knew about her father and my wife. But Liam wasn't home, and that gave me a strange sense of peace. We sat in the kitchen, and Emma poured us both tea. For a while, everything was just fine. She asked how things were going at work, and I tried to keep the conversation light. But then it all started distracting. I was drinking tea when she left the room for a few minutes. Her body was like Aphrodite's. I almost dropped my cup and, looking at the shards, I felt her hands grab my tie and drag me into the hall. It happened so fast that I didn't know what to do. But I didn't have to do anything. It was like a switch had been flipped, so I'm not in control anymore. She was. It wasn't just physical. It felt like something else, something deeper, something that connected us in a way I couldn't understand. She was just on fire, her moans spreading throughout the house as she rode me, almost breaking the couch underneath us. This went on for an hour, and by the time Liam came home to see the scene, of course, he was furious, but now he knew what justice was.